Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jenny Guzman, and I'm the program director for Common Cause Arizona. And today we're going to be going over Arizona Voter Protection 101 and some key information that you need to know as you're coming into Arizona and preparing for the general election. So in this module, we're going to be going over a couple of things, including deadlines, voting procedures, vote by mail, provisional ballots, some big common topics that come up here in Arizona, and finally, voting resources. So starting off with deadlines, these are the deadlines for the Arizona general election. So first and foremost, October 7th was the voter registration deadline, and that's already passed, so we cannot register new voters for this upcoming election. People can still register to vote, but unfortunately it won't be for the 2024 general election. And in Arizona, we do not have any same-day voter registration. October 9th is the day where ballots are mailed and drop boxes become available. This has already started, this has already begun, so the early voting period is on its way already. October 25th is the last day to request a mail ballot. That means that if you want to vote by mail, October 25th is by when you have to request your ballot. And then by October 29th, mailed ballots must be mailed back and postmarked or received by this date. So making sure that if you or somebody is mailing out their ballot on October 29th, they're not waiting until 11 p.m. on October 29th, but instead making sure that they're doing it before their USPS delivery person gets there. November 1st is the last day to vote early. And then finally, November 5th is election day. Now, going over some basic voting procedures and vote by mail for the 2024 Arizona general election. First and foremost, with vote by mail, it's important to remember that the majority of Arizona voters vote early. That's over 90%. Every political party in Arizona votes by mail. And voters can mail their ballot back, again, no postage required, by October 29th. Voters can also drop off their ballot at a drop box or early voting site as well. And on election day, voters can skip the line and simply go ahead and drop off their ballot. This is really convenient and one of the perks of vote by mail. This is also called the active early voting list. In the past, it's been referred to as the permanent early voting list, but now it's referred to as the active early voting list. And registered voters can request a ballot again by October 25th. Now, it's really important to remember that there's going to be some voters that find out for the very first time that they are no longer on the active early voting list, what was previously the permanent early voting list, due to some legislative changes that have occurred over the past couple of years. So because of that, it's really important to ensure that everybody's checking their voter registration status and comes ready with a plan to vote. Again, since the majority of voters vote early on election day, some things may come up and it's just important for folks to know. Arizona uses a mix of vote centers, precinct voting, and hybrid locations, and it varies by county. So it's important to make sure that you check to ensure that wherever you're voting or wherever anyone is voting, they know the plan and they know that they may not necessarily be able to go there to their closest location. They may have to go to a specific location. So depending on your county, please make sure that you check. People with their ballot, like I said earlier as well, can skip the line on election day. So again, making sure that if you are planning to vote by mail, if you're not able to make it during the early vote period, you know this and this doesn't deter you from voting on election day. Another thing that comes up a lot during election days and when voting in person is that tribal law trumps state law. So that means that if, let's say, that you are voting on a tribal location, if there is a law requiring masks, even though state law doesn't require wearing masks, you must follow tribal law. And then finally, people electioneering or third-party observers must be outside of the 75-foot zone. Every single polling location is going to have a sign marking the 75-foot zone, and voters are allowed to be within the 75-foot zone, but anybody that's not there to vote has to be outside of the 75-foot zone. So it's really important to ensure, in case you see anybody that's electioneering, doing any voter intimidation, or even trying to convince voters to vote a certain way, any of that has to be done outside of the 75-foot zone, and anything with intimidation or voter suppression needs to be reported. Another thing that's important to know, especially with the 75-foot line, is that no weapons or firearms are permitted within the 75-foot line, or even outside of the 75-foot line at some polling locations, such as schools. Again, a lot of these polling locations are at schools or in areas that do not allow firearms or weapons. So it's important to ensure that if you or someone you know does carry a weapon regularly, that they account for this when they go vote. And then also, police are not allowed to hang out at voting locations. That is considered voter intimidation. A law enforcement official can go in and vote in uniform, but they cannot just hang out and loiter there. And again, voter intimidation is illegal and you can be prosecuted for it. Now let's talk about provisional ballots. So it's really important to remember that in Arizona, no voter can be turned away at the polls without receiving a provisional ballot. There are two kinds of provisional ballots. First off, regular, and second, conditional. Regular does not require anything extra from the voter, but they are encouraged to track their ballot status in case of anything. So if a voter receives a provisional ballot, make sure that you have a plan to check the status of your ballot and just follow it through the process. Now, if for some reason you receive a conditional provisional ballot, that typically means that there was an issue with your voter ID and proving that you are who you are. That requires proof of ID within 5 calendar days after a federal election or 3 calendar days after any other election. And you want to make sure that you're following the correct steps in each of your counties and making sure that you're following the procedures listed to be able to cure your ballot depending on what your county requires. And again, there are alternatives to voter ID. So if you don't have a valid ID, that's a-okay. There are different types of proof of identity that you can use to make sure that you're able to cure your ballot and prove that you are who you say you are, even if you don't have a valid ID. Now, going over some of the common topics that occur in Arizona, these are some issues that come up a lot or just some general conversation topics that have come up in the past and are really tied to Arizona. So starting off, it's important to know that Arizona is a hotspot for election disinformation. And this is largely due to the 2022 voter suppression attempts that took place in Maricopa and many other counties. I'm sure many of you have heard about this on the news. Many of you have seen glimpses of this on social media. But for those living in Arizona, this is something that voters are very fatigued by and something that disinfo has plagued with all of our elections. So it's really important to ensure that voters are receiving the correct type of information and they have the resources they need to be able to do things safe and securely. A little bit of background. So Maricopa election workers were targeted and accused of rigging the election after some printers failed to perform to their required standards. Now, this concluded in a large investigation. This resulted in a lot of studies being done, and at the end of the day, they found out that the reason some of these printers failed was because the paper that they used was just a little bit too heavy. But since then, poll workers have been trained to prepare for a lot of these printing issues. Poll workers now are equipped to know what to do in some of these situations. And a lot of this is just standard practices that occur when you're running such a large election. But it's really important to remember that our poll workers and our Arizona elected officials and election administrators understand what it takes to run these elections and are prepared and equipped to ensure they serve all registered Arizona voters. And also, voters in Maricopa County were targeted by election denialists and intimidated at voter drop boxes. And we saw some of this happen in counties outside of Maricopa County. There are some Board of Supervisors that also took part in trying to overthrow the results of the 2020 election. So at the moment, they are still being prosecuted. Some of these people are still going through trial. So again, this is not something that has necessarily concluded in Arizona. So as we head into the 2024 general election, just keep in mind that these are some things that may come up, but Arizona is a safe place to vote. Arizona administers their election safe and securely, and Arizona has one of the best election systems in the country. So another thing to know that Again, these are normal issues that get resolved in a timely manner. Arizona poll workers are trained and they have a system to make sure that anything that comes up gets addressed. I'm sure we've all seen a lot of these issues come up, especially during off years, maybe hearing some new things about printers or whatnot. But what doesn't necessarily get talked about as much is how quickly these issues are resolved and just how common some of these things may be. And another thing to remember and keep in mind, because Arizona is not just a battleground state, but Arizona is a state that has more and more voter turnout every election. Election day is not results night, especially in Arizona. People hear this all the time, but Arizona no longer has blowout elections. And to give you an idea of as to just how true that is, in 2022, after recounts and many, many days, the Attorney General position was decided by only 280 votes. So we know that when elections take long, when elections results take time to count, to go through the processes, that's a good thing because we know that administrators are doing their checks and balances. We know that administrators are going through the processes and doing things in a safe and secure way instead of rushing through things and possibly having flaws. When at the end of the day, we want to make sure that everything is being done accurately and everything is being done securely. And I think that the race that happened in 2022 with the Attorney General position is a great example as to just why it's so important to make sure that things are being done in a proper way and not just being rushed through. Because again, these are 280 votes. I'm sure many of you, many of us have more followers on social media than 280 votes. So it's really important to just like contextualize how small of a number that is for such a large state and why it's important to trust the processes and allow these processes to take place, even if they take longer than election night. Now, finally, going over some voting resources here in Arizona. The best way to start out, the best place to start out looking for some of your resources is my.arizona.vote. This is a state website hosted by Arizona, and it has a lot of information as to finding out your polling place, checking your voter registration status, tracking your ballot, and more. But an important note for anybody that's in Maricopa and Pima, you can start off using my.arizona.vote, but some of the functions may not work for you, but they'll link you there to your proper website. Again, Maricopa and Pima tend to use different portals when it comes down to finding your polling place or tracking your ballot, but it's all the exact same. Maricopa and Pima just like to do things their way, especially since they're the two largest counties in Arizona. It just is the way they operate. But starting off at my.arizona.vote is a great way to start your search for whatever you're looking for. And also Election Protection runs these different hotlines to provide voters information that they may need. So again, 866-OUR-VOTE, 888-VEYVOTA, that's the Spanish hotline. Native Vote is 888-777-3831. This is run by the ASU Indian Legal Clinic by their Native Vote Project. And the Asian Languages Hotline, 888 API Vote, and the Arabic Hotline, 844 Yala US. So again, we have a lot of resources, and it's really just important to make sure that any voter is going in with one, a plan to vote, number two, making sure that they know their rights as well as they're going to either vote by mail or vote in person. And finally, if anything suspicious is coming up, or if you want to report anything that may come up, or if you have any questions, you can always contact any of these hotlines and get the support that you may need. Thanks, everyone.